Hey, my friend, I'm Dr. Lee Warren. I'm so grateful to be back with you for some more self-brain surgery. Thank you for listening to the podcast and always coming back here to help me help you change your mind and change your life. We're going to smash neuroscience and faith together in a new way. And I've got an exciting new self-brain surgery operation for you that will really help you get all this stuff done. Today, we're going to talk about something called getting amped up for life change. AMP is my shorthand for something called anticipatory metacognition practice. That's a doozy. Anticipatory metacognition practice. We talked recently about the incredible gift that humans have of metacognition, of being able to get out of our head and think about what we're thinking about, and how that's really the key to undergoing this amazing switching process of getting our microtubules to make new synapses for us and structurally change our minds and change our brains in real time so we're never stuck with the brains that we have. So today we're going to take control of our mind, change our brains, transform our lives by getting amped up. We're going to practice anticipatory metacognition. We're going to dive into this powerful new self-brain surgery tool to help you anticipate risks, direct your attention, and flourish using the tools of self-brain surgery. This episode is inspired by some work that I did in my upcoming book, The Life-Changing Art of Self-Brain Surgery. It's now available for pre-order on Amazon, but the cover art is not up there yet. So I'll share that link with you as soon as the cover art's available and some of the endorsements are in there. I want you to get a real feel for what the book is like. But the pre-order process is here. It's coming very quickly where you'll be able to order the book, and I'll give you instructions on how to do that if you want. I'm excited to share that book with you in February of 2026. And just as an announcement, we are going to have a book launch team. And if you're interested in helping me get the word out to the whole world about this powerful new book, and you're interested in being part of our launch team, there'll be some perks that come along with that. We're going to highly select a few people to help us do that. So if you're interested in being one of those ambassadors to help get the word out about self-brain surgery, send us an email to Lauren, my friend Lauren, who works for us. It helps us get all this work done and has built the YouTube channel, and she's doing such a good job for us. Lauren is available at contact@drleewarren.com, contact@drleewarren.com. Let her know that you're interested in potentially being on the book launch team. And when we're ready, we'll reach out to you and give you some information of how you potentially could be part of that process. It's going to be selective because we need to make sure you're geared up and ready to help us do that. But it'll come with some perks too. So we're excited about that. And if you're interested, send an email, contact@drleewarren.com, and say, hey, Lauren, I'd love to be part of the launch team. What do I need to do next? And you'll hear from Lauren when it's time. So today we're going to talk about cutting edge neuroscience smashed together with timeless faith to show you how God wired your brain for hope and healing. So grab a notebook, get a cup of coffee or some water, or get yourself ready to go. And we're going to scrub in just a second and get after it. But before we do any of this stuff, I have a question for you. Hey, are you ready to change your life? If the answer is yes, there's only one rule. You have to change your mind first. And my friend, there's a place where the neuroscience of how your mind works smashes together with faith, and everything starts to make sense. So I'll ask you again, are you ready to change your life? Well, this is the place. It's Self-Brain Surgery School. This is where you learn the truth about how science and faith are designed to work together to answer the big questions that trauma, tragedy, and other massive things bring us. Here is where you learn to manage your mind, optimize your brain, and navigate your life to become healthier, feel better, and be happier. This is the Dr. Lee Warren Podcast, where we go deep into how we're wired, take control of our thinking, and find real hope. This is where we leave the past behind and transform our minds. This is where we start today. Are you ready? This is your podcast. This is your place. These are your people. And now is your time, my friend. Let's get at it. All right, are you ready to get after it? Okay, before I do every surgery, I always scrub in. I take 6 minutes to stand out at the scrub sink and wash my hands and get any dirt or anything that I'm carrying off of my hands and off of my arms so I don't drag it into the operating room. And I use that time to clear my mind and make sure that I'm not carrying any emotional baggage or anything that's distracting me or that might take my focus and energy and presence away from my patient, because my patient deserves my full attention. And so take a second, just examine yourself, think about what's going on. If you're stressed or anxious, if you're worried about something, get that vagus nerve going for you. Take some deep breaths and control your physiology. Convince yourself that you really do have the power for your mind to tell your brain and your body what to do. and just spend a minute or two just kind of getting yourself ready. Say a prayer maybe and say, God, let me just absorb and learn all of this. Let me understand how you wired me, how you made me, how I can take control of that process and rewire things when they're not working well for me. And just scrub in for a second, okay? Get yourself ready. Focus your attention. And we're going to learn a new self-brain surgery operation right now. Hey, what if you had a superpower by which you could anticipate future problems, focus your attention, and operate on your thoughts to find hope, even when life feels hopeless? Well, that's what self-brain surgery is all about. And today we're going to explore 3 new tools: anticipatory metacognition, the premortem analysis, which we've talked about a little bit before, and selective attention, which we've talked about a lot before. But those 3 things in a new combination will give you a new operation today that we're going to call Amped Up, anticipatory metacognition practice, okay? I want you to have a practice, something that you routinely do. Why? Because the 9th commandment of self-brain surgery says what you're doing, you're getting better at, right? What you're doing, you're getting better at. And so we're going to get better at getting better by learning how to practice anticipatory metacognition. And what is that? Well, it's time to talk about it. Anticipatory metacognition is using your superpower of being able to think about your thinking, but to do so in an anticipatory, future-oriented way. Here's what most of us do, okay? Most of us, when we're not actively thinking about something, our default mode kicks in, and the default mode network gets us significantly self-focused, and we start worrying about the past, feeling ashamed or guilty or stressed about the past, or having our feelings hurt, or being offended about things in the past, or we start anticipating the problems and issues and setbacks and letdowns and failures and diseases and problems that we may face in a future that we don't believe we have much control over. That's what the default mode network does. It kind of spends time in the past and in the future, but always the me show, always focused on me and what's going on with me and what I think and why is everybody so rough on me and all that stuff. Why does nobody respect me? All those things. Why didn't they do this for me 5 years ago? It was my time. They should have done it for me. Whatever it is. Why didn't I get that promotion? Why won't I get that job in the future? All that self-referential stuff is default mode network, okay? So what I want to teach you today is this Luke 12:48 idea, when God says, to whom much is given, much is required. And I want you to see that process of being able to think about your thinking and project that into the future and into the past was actually given to us by our Creator. Now, if you're not a believer, it's okay. You don't have to believe that God gave you these abilities, but you need to see and recognize that you do have these abilities. And I think, as I've said to you many times before, I think that the truth is that when you start seeing things clearly, when you start getting your right and left brains in the right sync, and you stop objectifying and two-dimensionalizing everything, and you start seeing a big picture, you'll start to say, wow, if I'm really designed this way, if my brain and my mind and my body really do work this way, and that always seems to produce flourishing in my life when I get that right, maybe somebody who cares about me built me that way. Maybe when the Bible says that the Holy Spirit wants to advise me and guide me and teach me these things, maybe it's because it's true. And maybe when I apply these principles to my life that Scripture said thousands of years ago, before they could have possibly known that neuroscience was going to later validate them, maybe it's because those things are true. And therefore, maybe you'll start asking some different questions, and maybe that'll lead you to some questions about God even. And then I'll be here when you're ready to have a conversation about that. Okay? That's what I think. So, to whom much is given, much is required. That's Luke 12:48. So if you start to see that you have this ability to think about your thinking, and then you recognize that that was given to you, not so you could spend a lot of time forecasting doom into the future, or arguing with yourself, or feeling shame over yourself, or looking back in the past and wishing things had been a different way, or mourning or ruminating or being stuck in something that happened that you can't change or control anymore. Maybe instead of that being a curse, that you're stuck in those things, or that you tend to think and ruminate on those things, or tend to worry in that way, maybe instead you start seeing the system for how it's designed to help you. And you start learning how to use these gifts, anticipatory metacognition, the premortem analysis, and selective attention, to your good instead of to your harm. And then that'll open up some bandwidth emotionally for you, and you can start using them to help other people. Because remember, we have a 2-patient rule. I wrote a whole chapter about that in my upcoming book. where everything you do in your life, all your thoughts become things, and everything that happens affects other people, the people around you, the people in your sphere, the people that are close enough to be affected by your electromagnetic field and your heart math, and the people to whom you are quantumly entangled in the universe. And there's all kinds of examples of that, as I talk about in the book and as we'll talk about more on this show. I'll give you an example real quick. Some people call this a synchronicity. Some people just say it's good luck or just an accident. I think there's more to it. Last weekend, I had a scheduled Zoom interview or Riverside interview, a scheduled podcast interview with Steve Messler, the Olympian, who was on the show last week. We released that episode last week. In the morning of that interview, I went out for a run. And I don't know if I told you, I think I did. I hurt my back in December. I was running about 100 miles a month last year. I got in really pretty good shape. And then I hurt my back at the very end of the year. And I got to where I couldn't work out or do anything because I was in pain a lot of the time. It's kind of funny, right? My back surgeon, a neurosurgeon, injured his back, and I couldn't exercise for about 4 months. And it was really a big deal. And I was frustrated because I got weak and I was gaining some weight. And all these things happened because I couldn't exercise like I had been. And then I was finally able to start going again in about April. And then as May played out, I got more and more. And as June happened, I started getting where I could run a 5K again or a little bit longer. And that morning, where I was supposed to talk to Steven a little bit, I ran the first 10K, the 6.24 miles that I'd run this year outside. And my goal was, I set a goal for the run. I want to run every step of this without having to stop for water or stop to walk. I want to run every step. And I knew I was going to be slow because I was out of shape, right? I hadn't been running those distances, but I thought maybe I could get the distance done. You have to set the proper goal, right? Not so much can I run a 10K in this amount of time, but can I run a 10K at all? Can I complete the race, right? Not how fast can I do it, not comparing myself to previous times when I was able to do it, but to today, where I'm at now with this injury and just getting back on it, can I get this distance done? That was my goal. Can I get it done? I want to get it done. And about halfway through, I hit the wall. I was tired. My back was hurting a little bit. My legs didn't feel very good, and I didn't have much motivation. And I thought to myself, you know what? I want to stop running and just walk home because I don't want to wear myself out. I've got these interviews today. I got to talk to Steve Messler and all that stuff. I had a couple of other interviews and meetings to do. And then I had a thought. Steve Messler, who I'm about to talk to in a little while, is an Olympic gold medalist. He's a champion. And there were certainly days when he was training for the Olympics when he didn't feel like it or he was working through an injury. And I actually had this thought, you know what? If Steve was running with me here today, I wouldn't quit when I felt bad because he would still be going and he would pace me, and I wouldn't want him to think that I was weak or out of shape or that I didn't have enough guts to finish this race. And if Steve was here running next to me, I wouldn't quit. And guess what? Just that little mental image gave me a boost, and I was able to finish the race. So I thought, hey, I'm going to send him a text message and tell him that even though he was in Calgary, Canada, and I was in Nebraska, he was helpful to me today because I let him inspire me from a distance. And I sent that text, and I kid you not, I sent a message, a voice message, and I kid you not, about 30 seconds after he read it, I could see when the reading thing popped up, he sent me a video, and he was out running. And he said, Lee, I was running a 10K, and I got to tell you, I got your message, and I had this big smile come over my face because I was literally, when I got your message, I was thinking, I don't feel good today. I don't feel like running today. I'm just going to walk back to the house and get ready for this interview. But then I thought, Steve said, I want to make sure I give it my all because I want to get my mind ready for my meeting with Lee today. And I want to make sure I show up with presence and power and do a good job for him and his podcast and his listeners because he's given me a chance to be on his show and encourage and inspire his listeners. And I need to finish this run so I can be proud of myself and be ready for that interview. And so it was amazing because I was thinking about Steve and I was running and I used him to inspire me. And at the very same moment, thousands of miles away, he was thinking about me and using me to inspire him and you to inspire him. And that, my friend, is quantum entanglement. That's the two-patient rule, okay? We were entangled mentally. Now, whether you believe that's a literal, like universal connection that God made, I think that's the basis of intercessory prayer, by the way. I think God puts something on your heart and in your mind. He has you interact with him in the quantum field. He has you put that request and that person up before him, and he interacts in the brain and in the life of that person to answer that prayer in some way, and in the way that he's sovereign over, in the way that he needs it to be answered. And that entanglement, that willingness that you have to commit your mind and your mental energy to God and to the way, the physics of how he connects people and the church and people across the world and the universe and even time. I think that's the reason he gave us the phenomenon of quantum entanglement. And there's some research behind that now that's starting to come out. So it sounds kind of weird, but what I'm saying is, whether you think it's just serendipity or coincidence or luck, or you think there's something more to it, we were connected that day in a real way. So the two-patient rule is this idea that every thought and everything you do interacts with somebody and impacts them. And now we know through epigenetics, it can even impact their generations after them. And so be careful with how you think. So this Luke 12:48 idea of anticipatory metacognition is important, and it's valuable, and to whom much is given, much is required. So we're going to talk now about the three things you've been given: anticipatory metacognition, the premortem analysis ability, and the selective attention gift. And those three things together are gifts to help us flourish and help others do it also. So let's unpack that. We don't spend a lot of time on this show talking about particular parts of the brain. There's a million accounts on Instagram and on YouTube if you want somebody to say, hey, you act this way because your amygdala does this, and you respond this way because your frontal lobe does this, and because your hippocampus is overactive, and because your hypothalamus isn't making enough, whatever. There's a lot of shows like that. And I don't do that very often because I don't ever want you to forget that you're not just a cumulative assembly of parts of your brain, that your mind is in charge of all that. And understanding how the brain works is important, but it's more important to understand that you have control over those things, and not that you're stuck with them, not that you're formed by the function of your brain, but that you can inform and change and influence the structure of your brain, and that will make your life better. So we don't often talk much about this thing does that and this thing does that here. I'm more always trying to encourage you to understand that you can change the way those things are working. So today, though, in order to really unpack this idea of anticipatory metacognition, I need to give you some information, some neuroscience about some networks in your brain and different parts of the brain that are involved in those networks, just so you have kind of a basic understanding of what these things do. And I think also that will inspire and put you in awe of, almost in a worship frame of mind, of how you can understand how well you're put together and how well armed you are to deal with the traumas and tragedies and massive things that come along in life. Okay, so that's why we don't talk about brain parts all that much, but today we're going to have to. Your brain, of course, is the most complex organ in the universe, 80 to 100 billion with a B neurons, constantly rewiring itself through a process called neuroplasticity that is largely under your control, which is the whole basis of self-brain surgery, is this ability to harness what God gave us and take all this stuff under our control, so we're not just passive victims of evolutionary processes. Every thought you think shapes your brain's connections and literally changes its structure. That's the science behind self-brain surgery. So here's the thing, relevant to our conversation today. When you anticipate problems or reflect on your thinking, that's called metacognition, thinking about your thinking. A lot of times we sort of devolve our thinking into this worst case scenario thing. We spend time and mental energy, which then turns into brain events and then turns into physiological stress and cortisol release and all that stuff, and bad moods and drinking to numb ourselves and all that stuff. But when we do that, what we're doing is hijacking the system that was designed for our good, and we're using it not for good, for our own harm, which is in violation of our first commandment of self-brain surgery. I must relentlessly refuse to participate in my own demise, right? So when we allow ourselves to go into this default mode and go down this rabbit hole of all the different things that could happen and can go wrong, or all the things that happened in the past that we wish would go differently, or get a text from our brother-in-law and we spend 30 minutes thinking of all the different times he did something wrong and hurt our feelings, or wasn't nice, or didn't take care of our sister, or whatever, that's hijacking a system that's actually designed to help you. So let's look at how we use it to help us. Anticipatory metacognition is this term. It's been used in computer science and artificial intelligence. It's been used in psychology. But it's this idea that when you engage your future thinking instead of to worry or forecast doom, but rather to think through an outcome, let's say one that you don't want to happen. Like what would, if I went through a divorce, if Lisa, something happened and our marriage came apart, I can think into the future, and instead of worrying about my marriage someday coming apart, she's going to figure out that I'm a loser and she's going to leave me someday and all that stuff that we do in our brains. Instead of that, I say, what if that happened? What are some of the things that would lead to that happening? What kinds of things could occur that might take us from here where we seem really solid to there where our marriage is coming apart? And you can spend some time thinking down the path of not, oh no, what if this happens someday? Or I'm sure someday this is going to happen, but rather, if that thing were to occur that pops into your head, what would the steps have been that led me down that path, led us down that path of that thing happening? When you do that, the prefrontal cortex of your brain gets active. It comes online. You get out of this default mode and you get into this frontal lobe thing. So the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, is your brain's executive suite. I've called it the CEO of the brain, the control tower. It's the place where you plan and problem solve. And in your mind, you get into this control and rational, reasonable decision making. There's also a part in the middle called the anterior cingulate cortex. You hear us talk a lot about the mid-anterior cingulate gyrus, which is involved in complex grief and also willpower and getting stuck and getting unstuck and all that. But the anterior cingulate cortex also gets involved in this anticipatory metacognition things, and it's kind of like an alarm system. It'll light up and start spotting potential errors or risks. It'll help you see places along the path. Now understand one thing that's important to say. Your brain can't tell the difference between a problem that you're actually experiencing and thinking about or a problem that you're just imagining. Your brain doesn't know the difference. Your brain does the same stuff and your physiology does the same stuff, whether you're just thinking about something or whether it's actually something that you're dealing with or that's actually happening. So be careful with that, because you can put your brain and your body and your epigenetics and your generations and the people around you with whom you're entangled and influencing through the two-patient rule, you can put them through some stuff they don't deserve to be going through if you're imagining the wrong stuff and you fail to recognize that it's not real, it's just imaginary. Okay? So your hippocampus also gets involved. Now, hippocampus is like a flight simulator. It's like a time machine. It lets you travel into the future. It lets you simulate future events. And so the hippocampus normally is involved in error detection, like what's going on in the environment around me that might be a threat, or in the processing of scenarios that you're in and comparing them to previous ones by grabbing old memories and cataloging them and presenting them to you as, well, last time it felt like this, maybe that's what's happening now, or last time this occurred, here's what you were feeling and thinking, so maybe you should feel and think that now, and all that kind of stuff. And also as kind of a guard dog, like watching out for threats and stuff that might be going on that could harm you. But in this context, hippocampus is the scenario simulator. There's some research from Fleming in 2010 and Schachter in 2012 that talks about this flight simulator idea, sort of this future problem simulator that hippocampus gets involved in. And together, these regions, prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate, hippocampus, they let you think about your thinking in an anticipatory way out into the future. So how do we use that for our benefit? Well, before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about hippocampus, okay? Because there's a thing called the hippocampal simulation of futures. I just told you that hippocampus acts like a flight simulator or acts like a time machine where you can get into the future or get into the past. And if you're not careful, you can spend a lot of time thinking, worrying, feeling bad about all these moments that you're not actually in instead of living in the moment that you are in, okay? So hippocampus plays a crucial role in that thing. And if we're going to use it to our advantage, then what we can do is, let's say again in the issue of marriage, let's say you constantly worry about your marriage coming apart, but that doesn't help you, because then you start becoming defensive and you start worrying, you start getting suspicious, and you start worrying about every time your spouse's phone dings, or you start worrying about their computer history and all that stuff, and it's not helping you. But instead, you think about this. I'm going to project myself into the future, and I'm going to think about this marriage coming apart. I'm going to think about this problem at work manifesting itself, or this issue with my kids that I'm worried about coming to pass, or this thing that might happen with my friend and my friendship coming to pass. I'm going to think about that as if it happened, but I'm not going to then react to it and get into the sadness, mourning, fear, all that stuff, numbing, protecting myself, all those things. Instead, I'm going to say, okay, if we got to here, what would some things have been along the way? What would have been some of the steps or the landmarks or the checkpoints that got us to that place? Maybe if my marriage came apart, maybe at some point I stopped being emotionally available to my spouse. Maybe at some point I started bringing problems home from work. Maybe at some point I started scrolling all the time instead of talking, and we went hours or days or months without having a real conversation. Maybe we got too busy with the kids and all that, and we stopped having date night. And maybe we got financially in some trouble and we weren't talking about things, and we weren't a partnership, and we were spending too much money and we got ourselves in trouble, and that led us to stress. Or maybe there was infidelity or whatever. You start projecting these steps along the way, and you can then reverse engineer some of the things that you might need to do differently in the future to avoid that same outcome. Okay? In business, we call this the premortem analysis. But in this anticipatory metacognition stage, we're going to rely on hippocampus to give us this simulator ability. Okay? The right anterior, particularly right anterior region of the hippocampus, is intensely involved in imagining future events than it is in remembering past ones. So this is your simulator, okay? Pilots spend lots of time in the flight simulator because it's cheaper and safer than flying a real airplane as they're learning and recertifying, right? Surgeons these days spend a lot of time in surgical simulators and playing video games to get better. The Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds spend time before all their flights closing their eyes and imagining all the moves as a team. They talk through their turns and their loops and their flips and when they're going to need to add power and what they're going to say on the radio. And they do all that stuff as a way of getting into this anticipatory metacognition thing to avoid the crash or the problem. And that's hippocampus, okay? Adapting to novel situations, imagining future decision-making, planning, reverse engineering, that stuff is all hippocampus. It's recombining details. The hippocampus helps in recombining past experiences and details to construct a sort of a reasonable, coherent simulation of possible future events. Flexible ability to process things. The hippocampus is particularly important in simulating unlikely or novel future events, which requires sort of a more flexible ability to process information if you haven't been through that situation before than if it's something that has happened before and you're just worried about it happening again in the past. And this is important. What I'm about to say is really important. Hippocampus is also involved in encoding these simulated future events into memory, potentially for later recall and use in decision making. So what that means is if you're a Blue Angels pilot or a surgeon and you're using this gift of this hippocampal ability of anticipatory metacognition to think about something that might happen in an operation, then that will help you. It's been shown very clearly when athletes do this. If you think about the way the pass is going to come in and the way the cornerback's going to reach for the ball and how you might reach differently so you can make the reception and not drop the ball, then when it's actually time to run the play, you're more likely to execute it the way that's going to work better for you because you've anticipated it. And your hippocampus doesn't know the difference between you mentally planning that, mentally running that rep, mentally flying that flight or doing that surgery, or actually doing it. And so then when you do it, you have more muscle memory. Even though you didn't actually do the thing before, you're better at it because you've spent that time using your hippocampus to encode that simulated future event. Okay? So you can recall something that hasn't actually happened. By the way, that's important in like the bogus therapies that supposedly help people recall memories of events that had happened that didn't actually happen. That stuff is related to the same process. So again, use things for the gift that they are and not in a way that will harm you or others, okay? Now, hippocampus is part of a larger network, including parahippocampal cortex, parietal cortex, and prefrontal cortex, all these different areas that work together to support both remembering the past and imagining the future. So if you have a problem with your hippocampus, you can have some trouble with memory, and you can have some issues with recalling memory and storing memory and all of that, okay? But for our purposes today, we're interested in this simulator ability of hippocampus, which allows us to mentally rehearse potential future scenarios and then inform our present actions and decisions. That's anticipatory metacognition, okay? Now, in the business world, we talk, and I used to talk about it in the boardroom when I was on the board of Wyoming Medical Center. We talked about premortem analysis. Now, in medicine, we have something called an autopsy, which they sometimes call a postmortem analysis. So somebody dies, And the coroner opens that body up and runs all kinds of tests to figure out what went wrong. Why did this body die? Okay? But it doesn't do you much good if you're the patient being autopsied, right? It might help your family get closure. It might help the doctors understand what happened. It might help the pharmacist or the pharmaceutical company figure out the drug that was doing something wrong or was taken in too high of a dose or whatever. The postmortem can explain things for the cops about how your cousin poisoned you for the will that they wanted or whatever. But it doesn't do much good for you if you're the patient. And that's why we flip that on its head with the premortem analysis. So if this thing dies, what might have led it to die? So in the boardroom, we would talk about if our business decisions lead to a loss of revenue and that causes the hospital to struggle, what kinds of things would have gone on that led us to that problem? And how can we anticipate those so that they don't actually come to pass? We have a better outcome than we may have otherwise. So we spend some time imagining a bad outcome, not because we're doing worst case scenario, but because we're trying to prevent those worst case events from occurring. Does that make sense? So I want you to understand that you have a power and an ability to not let your default mode network take over and make you into this self-referential person, the me show, who's constantly thinking about my future issues or how bad my life is or all the troubles in the past. But instead, you're going to grab that gift and you can start to use it to focus on ways to keep your life moving in a direction that avoids these major issues. The Bible in 2 different places talks about making level paths for your feet. He's telling us, use your brain, use your mind and your brain to think about the future and pick a path that's not as prone to causing you trouble. Now, he's not saying don't take risks, don't fall in love, don't pursue dreams, don't do any of that. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying don't take difficult decisions. He's saying choose wisely the steps you're going to take to make sure that you get to the distance. Make sure you complete that 10K that you're trying to run. Okay? Choose wisely. Be careful. Make level paths for your feet. Selective attention is the other part of this. Humans are the only thing God created that have the ability to say, you know what I'm thinking about right now isn't helping me. I'm going to switch and think about something differently. Sometimes I catch myself in this loop and I'm thinking about what happened this morning. I got up this morning and made myself a cup of coffee and I came in my office and for some reason my eyes fell right on this shelf, this top shelf behind me. You can't see it from here. And on that shelf, Lisa has put 2 of my favorite pictures of Mitch. And then there's a little poem and a scripture that my sister-in-law sent that says Mitchell, and it's got a scripture. It's beautiful that my sister-in-law Jessica made for us a while back, right after we lost Mitch. And then next to those pictures and the poem is a Lego figure that Mitch made. Mitch loved to put those Lego figures together, and he would make, monsters or trucks or whatever. And the last Christmas that he was alive, Christmas of 2012, which of course we didn't know was our last Christmas with him, Lisa put one of those in his stocking as a Christmas gift. And that morning, while we were all sitting around having Christmas breakfast and opening presents, he put that thing together and he put it on the shelf in his room. And I, after he died, realized that this was the last Lego figure that he ever made in his life. And so every time we've moved, we bubble wrap that thing and we move it, and I keep it in my office to remind me of the beautiful, brilliant, creative, talented son that I had. He could put those complex, several hundred piece Lego figures together in half an hour, and he could just do it without the instructions. He could just see it, and he could do it, and he could make that happen. And this morning, I saw all that stuff, all those pictures, and I just immediately slipped from this morning quiet time mode that I'm normally in into the bereaved dad mode. And I miss my little boy. And I spent a few minutes thinking of all the things that I said that hurt his feelings, or all the times that I wasn't able to go to a ball game, or all the times that I did this or missed that or said this or didn't say this, or all the times I was frustrated with him as a teenager, and all the times I just wished I could put my arms around him and tell him that all this stuff was not going to be important in a few years. And I remember the phone call that we got on the night of August 20th, 2013, when we found out he had died. And I went down that rabbit hole. I wrote about it. I really opened up a vein and wrote about it vulnerably for you, and hope is the first dose. And if you've been through something hard and you want to hear somebody else's story about how we got back up out of that, you can read. And I talk about this dark staircase, this mental image I used to have all the time where I'd start thinking about Mitch, It was like I was being tugged towards this staircase, and I could see it in my mind. I would walk down those stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs, there was going to be a door. And I just somehow knew that on the other side of that door was Mitch after he had been injured and he was dying. And I could go through there, and my mind would tell me, my brain would tell me that I could save him, and I could be there with him, and I could do something about the problem. And then my mind would see me walking down those stairs, and I'd open that door, and he'd be already gone, and it was too late, and it was my fault because I didn't get there in time. That wasn't the truth, of course, but that's what I would feel, and I would think, and I would get myself in this loop of brain activity where I would think through that process and blame myself for all kinds of stuff and mourn and grieve and wail and be mad at God and all that stuff. And that happened this morning. It came out of nowhere. It came out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. And you know what I did? I thought about you. Thought about the fact that in a few hours I was going to be having a conversation with you about metacognition and selective attention and premortem analyses. And I was going to be having an opportunity to talk about the brain science and the neuroscience and the scriptural impact of how we tie those things together. And I was going to be able to share with you this idea that to whom much is given, much is required. And a whole life of my son's 19 years was not about the night he died and not about how sad I am as a bereaved father, but rather about the fact that his life now is helping you and helping me and hundreds of thousands of other people around the world change our minds and change our lives. And that happens, that ability to switch from bereaved father mode to legacy mode, to switching back into this work, this holy, important work that I'm doing right now to share this message with you. That's the switch that is selective attention. And of all the things God made, we're the only ones who have selective attention. And that's a gift. And who is given much, much is required of, friend. Your brain has a network called the salience network. You know the word salient, it's sometimes used to say like what, if you have a whole bunch of stuff, like what's the important stuff in that pile of stuff? What's the, of all this information, what's the salient features, the most important pieces of information? Salience refers to importance or the things that really matter in a stack of information or details. So your brain has a network that they call the salience network, and it decides what to focus on. It's kind of like a spotlight that says, okay, we got all this stuff out here. Boom, here's what I'm going to focus on. Here's what I'm going to pay attention to because this stuff is salient. This stuff is important. And what we know now, there's some research from Menon and Udden in 2010, for example, that talks about how the spotlight helps you filter out noise and things that aren't salient or important and focus in on what is important. And here's what we learned. You pay attention to fear, and your amygdala, the fear center, comes back in charge, and you start feeling anxious, and your body's physiology changes, and you release cortisol, and you get stressed out, and you focus really intensely on fight or flight and all that stuff. But if you shift to gratitude or thanksgiving or truth, then you calm the storm, and your brain frontal lobes get online. Your prefrontal cortex comes online. You start feeling peaceful and less anxious. And that's why the Bible says you can't be anxious and grateful at the same time. The neuroscience turns out, as Ian McGilchrist has written, attention changes the world. What you pay attention to, how you focus that salience network turns into what's real. And it's not just science, it's a superpower that God built into you. So I want to tell you just a little bit more about the salience network because I don't think we've ever talked about it before. I want to just make sure you've heard it from me as to what it means and what it's for. And I just want to share this with you. The salience network is a large-scale brain network, like the default mode network and like the cerebral executive network, the central executive network. And its role, like I said before, is in detecting and filtering salient stimuli, whether or not they're internal or external. And what does that mean? Again, your brain can't tell the difference, friend, between something you're just thinking about and something that's actually happening. Something you're afraid of or something that's actually scary and real, like a bear in your house or just a noise that you heard. Your brain can't tell the difference. So the salience network will detect and filter salient stimuli, whether they are just inside your mind or whether they're external and actually involved in what's happening in the real world around you. And then it's involved in switching between other brain networks, especially default mode network, which we talked about before, is the me show, self-referential past and future worry kind of thinking that's all about me, and the central executive network, the prefrontal cortex and cingulate, that's all about decision making and reason and rational decisions and all that stuff that helps you solve problems. So what's the salience network about? It's anterior insula, which is, again, insula is this part that's involved in detecting emotional signals and physiologically significant events. So insula is important in detecting that stuff. It's involved in interoception, this ability to think about what you're feeling and what you're going through and what your body's doing and all of that. That interoception is the ability to look inside and scan yourself. I have a whole chapter in the new book about that. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, again, cingulate, the dorsal part of the cingulate, the part back here, is involved in cognitive control, conflict monitoring, error detection, like, hey, something's wrong, that's cingulate, okay? Coordinates, the dorsal anterior cingulate coordinates the allocation of attention, like, what am I going to pay attention to right now? And then sort of marshaling and applying resources that you might need, physiological blood flow changes, hormonal and neurotransmitter releases that will help you do the thing that you're telling your cingulate that you need to do. And amygdala, of course, is involved in emotionally salient stimuli, particularly threats or rewards. And it has strong connections with the insula and the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, the ventral striatum, which is a part of the basal ganglia that's involved in reward processing and motivational salience. Again, finding the things that will help you get motivated and stay that way. And then there's an area called substantia nigra and the ventral tegmental area that's involved in releasing dopamine, the parts of your midbrain that make the neurotransmitter dopamine that's involved in reward and novelty detection. And then the thalamus is this relay switching station that the sort of patch bay, like we talked about the other day, that relays sensory information and participates in switching your attention from one thing to another. And finally, hypothalamus, which is involved in autonomic or sort of sympathetic, parasympathetic, and endocrine responses to stimuli that matter. So all those areas of the brain wired together, working together, form this salience network that helps you decide what's important enough to capture your attention and guides resource allocation, blood flow, neurotransmitters, hormones, again, to manage those things that are important. And the salience network is especially active during times when you feel emotionally charged or in the first time you experience something, first time you fall in love, the first kiss, the first exciting time, the first time you've been afraid of a particular thing, a novel event. Salience network gets involved. And dysfunction in that area can cause trouble like anxiety or it's depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia. Those disorders have some issues with the proper function of the salience network, okay? Because they have such the salience network has such widespread connections throughout your brain. Now, we've talked about default mode network. We've talked about cerebral or central executive network. I just wanted you to hear how salience network is related, okay? So again, we don't like to talk about brain parts too much, but today we needed to do that. So we talked about salience network, default mode network, central executive network, and how they relate to hippocampus and all the other stuff that's related to how you can selectively pay attention to something, okay? That's important. And I wanted to just cover that with you today. So let's go back to this idea of the ability that you have to engage selective attention, to engage anticipatory metacognition, and to engage this tool of the premortem analysis. And you can learn to do all that and get better at doing it because the salience network acts as a switchboard. When we talked last week about switching things up, salience network's involved in this, acts as a switchboard, helping you toggle between internally focused default mode stuff and externally focused central executive network stuff, depending on what's most important at the moment. This is an incredible superpower, okay? Now, what about the premortem analysis as self-brain surgery? How do we use that tool to avoid trouble? As we already said, one way is through running this play. If this thing dies, if this problem comes to pass, if this divorce occurs, if this relationship fails, if this financial problem arises, why would it have arisen? And it's not because you sit there and forecast doom and say, oh, it's because I'm a loser, nobody loves me, nobody's ever going to stay with me, Lisa's going to give up on me someday. It's not that. That's not the truth. Remember, biopsy your thoughts. Talk about the thought biopsy to examine your thoughts for truth. and impact. There's a whole chapter about that in the new book. We talked about it recently. I've created the whole thought biopsy worksheet that you can have for free if you sign up for my newsletter. And if you already subscribe to the newsletter and you don't have it, just send Lauren an email, contact@drleewarren.com, and she'll send it to you. But it's free. The thought biopsy worksheet is very helpful. So the premortem analysis is like a thought biopsy, but for future events and plans, future problems that may arise. Okay? So do the premortem analysis. Make that part of your daily quiet time. Make it part of your toolkit that you run through. And guess what will happen? The time it takes you gets much shorter. It becomes automated. Your brain gets really good at doing it in anticipation of things. Well, wait a minute. I'm worried about this, but instead of worrying about it, let me just reverse engineer it and say I can see 6 things that I kind of tend to do, or that we kind of tend to do, or that typically tend to happen, that as long as I don't do those 6 things, or as long as I steward them more carefully, this event probably won't come to pass. Or, you know what, I'm worrying about this thing and I'm doing a premortem and I'm seeing these 6 things that I never do. And we never do that in our marriage, and we're not likely to ever encounter that. So you know what? That worry is not even founded, and I can just quit worrying about it altogether. You see that? The premortem analysis gives you the ability to make those kinds of decisions and work backward from a potential future event and try to avoid having it happen. Or flip that on its head and say, what if there's something great that I want in my future? Steve Messler would say, I want to win the Olympic gold medal in bobsled. Do a premortem. What if that actually came to pass? What would I have had to do? Who would I have needed to become to make that happen? There's something called surface level change, and there's another thing called identity level change. And I'm just going to tell you that if you want to become an Olympic gold medalist, or you want to become a person who has a successful 60-year marriage like my parents and like Dennis and Patty did, Tata and Nanny, if you want to become a person who ends up your working career with a really good portfolio of investments and doesn't have to worry about money anymore, if you want to be a person who hits certain fitness targets or can run a marathon in under 2 hours or whatever, you don't get there by making surface level changes. Okay? Surface level changes are these superficial things. Well, I'm going to go buy some new running shoes, and then my shoes will look better, and I'll probably run faster, and then I'll become a gold medal Olympian. That's not going to get it done, right? If you want to make a change that's going to become real in your life, you make an identity level change. That's why Christianity talks so much about dying to yourself, about carrying your cross, about having the mind of Christ, about being transformed in your thinking so you're not to conform anymore. That's why God spends so much time saying, hey, in Ephesians 4, stop being lost in the futility of your thinking. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Become a new person. I've given you the mind of Christ. Your brain can get better if you learn how to think differently. You make this identity level change, okay? You change who you are in order to fundamentally go after better and bigger things in your life that God is calling you to. So you stop being sad and sick and stressed and stuck or settling all the time. And you start changing your life by changing your mind. That doesn't happen when you make surface level changes, when you change your clothes or lose a couple of pounds or buy new shoes or marry the person you met at the bar because you were lonely. That doesn't create a 60-year marriage most of the time, right? So I'm going to tell you a story, okay? I want you to understand this premortem. There's good in it and there's bad to it, okay? That there's a way to look at it to avoid trouble. There's a way to look at it to anticipate and achieve things that you haven't before, and that's incredibly powerful. I'm going to tell you a story about after Mitch died. In 2013, I was drowning in despair, and my brain was throwing these thoughts at me, and at the time, I didn't yet know that thoughts aren't always true, that feelings aren't always facts. I didn't know that I wasn't just my brain. I mean, I knew it on a Christian level. I knew that there's some part of us that lives after we die and that there's a soul and that we get a new body and all that. So I knew it intellectually, but on a neuroscience level, my training was that the brain creates the mind and that your thoughts and feelings are generated by brain and that they're, you have to listen to your internal voice and all that stuff. So my brain was telling me, you're never going to be okay again. This is too big of a hit. But then I started asking myself some questions, especially after we saw the truth of the MRI research that I've shared with you before. I wrote a lot about in the new book we spent some time, and Hope is the First Dose too. I wrote a whole chapter about the day we spent in the MRI Research Center, and I saw people literally change their minds, and Lisa tied that to Philippians 4, and we knew all of a sudden that your brain and your mind are not the same thing. And then I spent the last 12 years learning everything I can about that. And that's why I'm here talking to you today. So I started asking myself questions. What would happen if I stayed stuck? Why would I stay stuck? And what I realized is I was feeding negative thoughts. I was letting the amygdala run the show for me. I was spending all my time in fight or flight or freeze or fawn. I was stuck. And so I did this mental premortem analysis. I started seeing a person who stayed broken forever and began to drink or numb myself, and what that would do to my marriage and what it would do to my other kids and what my grandkids would think of me and what my legacy would be and what Mitch would think about that. And I started seeing this person that I did not want to become. And I began listing the risks that would expose me to: isolation, ignoring my family, losing hope, suicide, alcoholism, whatever, desperate, hopelessness. And that woke me up, friend, shifted my focus to gratitude. I have Lisa, I have other children, I have grandchildren, I have a practice, I have a mission in life now to help hurting people understand what's hurting them and find a way to get better, not just with surgery, but with mental surgery. With self-brain surgery, I can help people change their lives. And our family matters. And we haven't lost everything. We lost our son, but we still have so much. And I started journaling my progress. I started writing these SOAP notes. We've talked about SOAP notes before, the subjective, objective assessment and plan notes that we write in medical charts. And I started using that idea. And in the new book, there's a whole appendix about how to make SOAP notes for your own life. And I'll give you a link to a previous episode we've done about that. And I started writing these SOAP notes of myself, like I was the surgeon, but I was also the patient. I was the self-brain surgeon, but I was also the patient who was getting better. And that self-brain surgery process was born, and learned how to anticipate risks and rewrite my story. And this process of anticipatory metacognition and premortem analysis and selective attention saved my life. It saved Lisa's life. This is the basis for hope from a neuroanatomical point of view, as I wrote about in the newsletter last week. So I started documenting my progress and seeing the way that my mind was changing over time. And that gives me incredible hope to be able to say credibly to you, I can look you in the eye and say, there is nothing that can happen in your life that you can't overcome, become more resilient to in the future, and find a way to turn into something that has meaning and purpose again. You can find your way back to hope and even happiness again by using this gift, this three-pronged arm of anticipatory metacognition and premortem analysis and selective attention. You can learn how to name fears and begin to tame them, to name it, to know it, to understand what you're going through and how to deal with it, how your brain responds to your mind's direction, and real-time changes happen in the structural build and performance of your brain. Friend, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. But that gift comes with a burden. It's a responsibility. You're going to make these identity level changes because of these gifts that you've been given. To whom much is given, much is required. You are now in full possession of the knowledge that you don't have to run the worst case scenario show anymore, that you don't have to let your default mode network push you around anymore and spend all your time in the me show, spending time thinking about how bad the past has been or how bad the future is going to be. You now have some tools that you can use to hijack those same brain areas and turn them into an ability to forecast what you need to change in your steps so you hit a different target, a different destination than you will hit if you don't. The Bible says it very clearly. What you think about changes your life. If you want to be less anxious, be more grateful. If you want to feel less stress, think better thoughts. That's Philippians chapter 4, my translation of it. That's selective attention, friend. God gave you a brain that can choose what to dwell on so you can flourish and help others do the same. John 10:10, Jesus said it, the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. He is here. He came here to teach you how to use your mind and your brain the way he designed you to use them, so that you can become healthier and feel better and be happier. You don't have to stay stuck. You don't have to stay broken. It's time for you to start saying, God, show me, give me the eyes to see the places I might stumble. Give me the path. Let me see the path in front of me that would lead me to this outcome that I don't want, or will help me get to this outcome that I do want. You learn to pause to anticipate relational risks. That's self-brain surgery, aligning with God's heart for shalom, for peace, for wholeness. That's Jeremiah 29:11, by the way. I have a plan for you, a plan to prosper you and not to harm you, a plan to give you hope and a future. That plan includes you learning how to look out into the future and make level paths for yourself. When you pray or meditate on scripture like Isaiah 26:3, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are fixed on you, those whose minds are steadfast. If you learn how to think and pray and line your will and your mind up with what God wants you to do with your life, friend, you'll start overcoming this negative, worst case scenario, anticipatory thinking that's been hurting you, and it'll start helping you instead. That's how you're going to get amped up for a better future. Anticipatory metacognition practice. It's a mouthful, but it's a life-changing power that you have. And to whom much is given, much is required. Hey, do a little premortem exercise with me right now, a miniature one. Grab a pen or open your notes app, or if you're driving, just think through this. Pick something in your life, a decision, a project, a goal. Maybe it's a work presentation, a tough conversation, even your mental health journey. And imagine that it fails. Picture it vividly. Let yourself feel for just a second. Your presentation bombed, your talk went south, you got fired, your wife left you, your husband left you, you're still stuck with anxiety, whatever it is. And then write down 3 reasons why it may have failed in that way. And be honest. Don't write because I'm a loser. Of course I failed. Don't write that. Say, maybe I didn't prepare enough. Maybe I wasn't attentive enough. Maybe I didn't bring my emotional energy home that my spouse needed. Maybe I drank instead of dealing with the hard conversations. Whatever it is, write them down. These are the things that may lead, the things I can control that could contribute to that outcome that I don't want. Write them down, be honest. And then flip it around and write down one action instead that you can take to prevent those things from happening. For example, if you said, I didn't bring enough emotional energy home, say, you know what? I'm going to take an extra drive around the block on my way home from work. I'm going to pray. I'm going to do some self-brain surgery practice. I'm going to sing a worship song, or I'm going to just work this out. And I'm going to leave that trouble in the car, and I'm going to come in the house and play with my kids and embrace my spouse. And I'm going to be present emotionally. I'm going to say to my spouse, how was your day today? What did you go through today? Not just dumping out my emotional distress on them. So I'm going to write down some things that I can do differently. I'm going to start saving a little bit more of my paycheck. I'm going to stop spending this much on coffee. I'm going to start investing it instead. Whatever it is, write those things down and recognize that you have some power and some control over where this goes in the future. Okay? That's a little plan. Then write yourself a little soap note, a little documentation. I thought about this today. I felt this, subjective. I actually was having this happen, objective. This was actually occurring. I'm going to assess that honestly. I was feeling stuff, but it was a little different than what was actually going on. I'm going to rectify that and line them up so I'm dealing with objective truth. That's the assessment. Now, what's the plan? How can I deal with this better in the future? It's a simple but powerful thing. Your brain loves action steps. Listen, next episode, Friday, we have an incredible talk with Zach Windahl. He's an author. He's built a huge social media following by talking about the Bible and how it's so powerful and how you can make it simple and apply it to your life. We're going to talk about his incredible new book called The Bible Simplified. It's coming up on Friday. I don't want you to miss that episode with Zach Windahl. For now, though, start using this gift of anticipatory metacognition. Let's get amped up to change our minds and change our lives. Friend, I'm Dr. Lee Warren. I'm so grateful for the time that we spent together today doing this little bit of self-brain surgery that will help you overcome any type of trauma or tragedy or massive thing or performance failure or frustration or stuckness that you're dealing with in your life. And if you believe me, there's only one thing left. You can't change your life until you change your mind. And the very good news is you can start today. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please subscribe wherever you listen and be sure to follow me at Dr. Lee Warren on Instagram and YouTube. And to get the most out of the show, make sure to get my free weekly self-brain surgery prescriptions. Sign up at drleewarren.substack.com and I'll send you the powerful thought biopsy worksheet for free. drleewarren.substack.com. Every Sunday since 2014, I've been bringing you my best prescriptions for how you can smash faith and neuroscience together to become healthier, feel better, and be happier starting today. I'm Dr. Lee Warren reminding you to have a very self-brain surgery day.